Lien Kai was used to silence. Not the comfortable kind of silence that settles over a house late at night when everyone is resting. He was used to the other kind, the sharp, cutting silence that a room full of people produces when they have already decided someone is not worth talking to. That was the silence that had followed him through most of his 17 years. That was the silence he had learned to carry like a second skin. He woke before sunrise on the morning of the Grand Awakening ceremony. The dormitory hall was dark and still. The 5 other students who shared the long room were asleep, their breathing slow and even. Lien Kai sat up quietly, careful not to make a sound. He reached under his narrow bed and pulled out his academy uniform. He had pressed it the night before. He had pressed it the night before that, too. He dressed slowly, smoothing every fold with his palms. Then he stood in front of the small mirror nailed to the dormitory wall and looked at the place above his left pocket, the place where every other student in the academy wore a small embroidered crest showing their talent rank. His was blank. A clean square of dark fabric with nothing on it. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he put on his jacket, picked up his bag, and walked out into the corridor. The Academy of Orvale sat on a hill above the city, its towers rising so high that on cloudy mornings the upper floors disappeared into the mist. It had been built 400 years ago, and in those 400 years, it had trained some of the most remarkable people the continent had ever seen. Its stone walls held the history of thousands of students, their achievements carved into pillars, their portraits hanging in long corridors. Lien Kai had spent 3 years walking those corridors without once seeing a portrait that reminded him of himself. He had come to the academy because his family was a family of mages. His older sister had awakened at gold rank at the age of 15. His father had been diamond rank. His mother, before she passed, had held the rare silver flame talent that only appeared once in every few generations. Lien Kai was, as one of his professors had once said without any attempt at softness, the one the talent skipped. He was not angry about this. He had been angry once, for a short time, when he was 13 and first starting to understand what people really thought of him. But anger is heavy, and Lien Kai had discovered that heavy things slow you down. So he had set the anger aside. He had replaced it with something quieter and more useful, a steady, private belief that the instruments people used to measure worth were not always measuring the right things. He did not say this to anyone. He simply believed it, the way a person believes in the sun even on a day when the sky is full of clouds. By the time the morning light began coming through the high windows of the academy's entrance hall, students were arriving in groups. They wore their best uniforms. They spoke in excited voices. The 5 students who had already been confirmed for the ceremony, the 5 who had tested high enough in preliminary assessments to be ranked before the public event, walked together in a cluster, their crests catching the light. Edo Vash was among them. He was tall, with sharp features and the kind of confidence that sits so deep in a person it no longer needs to announce itself. He had already awakened at radiant gold rank during the early private assessment. Everyone in the academy knew this. He made sure of it. When Edo passed Lien Kai in the hallway, he glanced over once. Not with dislike, exactly. More the way a person glances at a chair they are not going to sit in. Then he looked away, and kept walking. The Awakening Hall was the most beautiful room in the academy. That was not a matter of opinion, it was simply a fact that anyone who entered it immediately understood. The ceiling was vaulted and high, every stone carved with the names of students who had achieved mythic rank talents in the academy's history. There were 7 names up there. 7, in 400 years. The revelation orb stood at the center of the hall, on a raised circular platform. It was a sphere of pure crystal, roughly the size of a person, and when it was active it pulsed with a faint, silver inner light, like something breathing. Around the platform, tiered gallery seats held an audience of faculty members, visiting nobles, and senior students. They were dressed formally. The air in the hall had the particular quality of air before something important, still, a little electric, not entirely comfortable. Lien Kai stood at the back of the line. This was tradition. The student with the lowest current assessment stood last. It was meant, the academy said, to give the highest-ranked students the most visibility. It had the additional effect, which no one mentioned out loud, of making the lowest-ranked student wait the longest and walk the farthest while everyone watched. He waited. The first student stepped forward. Her name was Celia, and she had always been kind to Lien Kai in the small, easy ways that did not cost anything, nodding at him in the library, not laughing when others did. When she placed her hand on the orb, it bloomed brilliant white, then fractured into a shower of ice blue light. The hall clapped warmly. Her rank inscription read, Crystal Frost. Rare Tier. The second student, a boy named Harvin, produced a double pulse of wind and fire that wrapped around each other in a spiral above the orb. The audience leaned forward. Dual element. Very rare. The third student produced nothing flashy, just a deep, resonant vibration that made the floor hum and every person in the gallery feel it in their chest. Sound talent. Ancient and unusual. The fourth student's talent manifested as a golden bird that spread its wings above the orb before dissolving into sparks. The gallery erupted. Gold Phoenix. One of the 10 rarest recorded talents in the Academy's history. Then Edo Vash stepped up. He moved slowly, the way people move when they are comfortable being watched. He placed one hand on the orb. The orb responded immediately, a violent surge of gold-white energy that expanded outward in a ring, cracking the stone surface of the podium and leaving a scorch mark that would stay there long after the ceremony ended. The gallery rose to its feet. Radiant gold. Confirmed publicly now, undeniable, the highest rank any student had produced in 23 years. Edo stepped back and looked directly at Lien Kai. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The look said everything. This is what talent looks like, and you do not have any. Lien Kai walked to the orb. The hall quieted. Not out of respect, out of the specific discomfort that settles over a crowd when they are about to watch something they believe will be embarrassing. A few people in the gallery looked at the ceiling. A few others looked at their hands. One junior faculty member whispered something to the person beside him, and the person beside him smiled faintly. Lien Kai stopped in front of the orb. He looked at it for one moment. He had thought about this moment for 3 years. He had tried to imagine it in many different ways. Now that it was here, he found that he did not feel afraid. He did not feel hopeful, exactly, either. He felt something simpler and harder to name, a readiness, maybe. A sense of something about to be answered. He raised his right hand and placed his palm flat against the crystal surface. For 3 seconds, nothing. The silver light inside the orb did not change. The hall, which had been quietly uncomfortable, shifted into something worse, a tight, strained silence. Someone in the upper gallery let out a small, nervous laugh. It died immediately. Then the orb went dark. Not dim. Not fading. Dark, completely, absolutely dark, the way a room goes dark when every light in it is cut at once. The silver pulse vanished. The crystal went black. And in that darkness there was a single breath of total silence, the kind of silence that does not happen by accident but by the weight of something enormous pressing down on the air. Then the orb erupted. Light poured out of it, not one color but all colors at once, shifting and layering, reaching upward in a column that struck the vaulted ceiling and cracked straight through it. Pieces of carved stone fell from above. The stained glass windows along the upper walls shook in their frames, and then one by one they burst outward, spilling fragments of colored glass down the exterior walls of the academy and into the courtyard below. The 7 names carved into the ceiling, the names of every mythic rank talent in 400 years, split down their centers. And the crystal orb, 400 years old and never broken, went dark and silent and still. It did not reactivate. It never reactivated again. On the judgment stone, the inscription burned itself in slowly, the way letters appear when they are being carved by something that has no need to hurry. Primordial Void. Mythic rank. Lien Kai's hand was still resting on the surface of the dark orb. He read the inscription. He removed his hand slowly. He stood very straight. The hall did not applaud. It could not. There is a state beyond surprise that human beings enter when something happens that does not fit inside any category they have ever been given, and in that state, the usual responses, clapping, cheering, gasping, do not come. People simply sat with their mouths slightly open and their hands still in their laps, looking at a 17-year-old boy standing next to a broken crystal sphere and an inscription they had only ever seen in the oldest books. Then something else happened. Every student in the gallery who held an active talent ranking felt it at the same moment. A pressure, faint and precise, moving through the air like a hand gently touching something in order to understand its shape. Mira Solen, who sat in the front row of the student gallery and was ranked first in her cohort, gripped the railing in front of her. Edo Vash, still standing near the podium, pressed one hand to his chest. Even Director Sareth Van, 300 years old, a man who had watched 11,000 awakening ceremonies, a man who had stopped being surprised by anything 2 centuries ago, went very still in his elevated chair at the head of the hall. The primordial void talent had already begun doing what it was made to do. It did not need Lien Kai's instruction. It did not need his permission. The moment it woke, it began reading. Every mana signature in the room, every talent, every carefully cultivated ability that the greatest young minds in the academy had spent years developing, the void touched them all, quietly and completely, and filed them away. It was not a threat. It did not take anything from anyone. But every person who felt it understood, in a wordless and absolute way, what they were in the presence of. Edo Vash's face was something to see. He had spent his entire life in rooms where he was the most talented person present, and he had organized his understanding of himself entirely around that fact. Now he stood 6 feet from a boy he had dismissed without a second thought, and he felt, for the first time in his life, genuinely small. He did not accept the feeling gracefully. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. And a decision formed behind his expression, cold and fast. He raised his hand. It happened quickly. He framed it as a stability test, a thing senior students occasionally did with newly awakened peers to help them ground their talent. He said this in a loud, calm voice that carried across the hall. Then he released a focused burst of radiant gold energy directly at Lien Kai. A radiant gold burst, concentrated and deliberate, would have been enough to send any normal student off their feet. In the open hall, with nowhere to go, a newly awakened student with no training would have had no answer for it. What happened instead took less than 1 second. The burst traveled. It crossed the 6 feet between them. It reached Lien Kai's chest. And then it stopped, not blocked, not deflected, but absorbed. The energy simply disappeared into the space around him, drawn in without sound, without effort, without Lien Kai raising a single finger. Then his hand came up. Slowly, the way a person lifts their hand when they are not quite sure why they are doing it. And the energy came back out, not because Lien Kai chose to return it, but because the void talent, having absorbed something, naturally released it. The burst that returned was not the same as the one that had gone in. It was larger. It carried more force, the way water rushing through a narrow passage builds pressure by the time it comes out the other side. Edo got a shield up. Barely. The impact drove him back 3 steps and left a crack in the stone floor beneath him. For a moment, no one moved. Then Director Sareth Van stood up from his chair. He was not a tall man, but when he stood in that hall at that moment, he seemed to fill more space than a person should be able to fill. He looked at Lien Kai for a long time without speaking. Then he placed his right fist against his chest and lowered his head, a gesture of deep formal respect that no one in the gallery had ever seen the director make to a student. Every person in the hall rose to their feet. Not because they had decided to. Not because it was required. They rose the way people rise at the edge of the ocean when a wave comes in larger than expected, involuntarily, on instinct, because something in the body understands scale before the mind does. Mira Solen stood with them. She was looking at Lien Kai with an expression that was difficult to read, not warmth, exactly, and not coldness either. It was the expression of a person who has just been given a piece of information that changes the shape of everything they thought they knew, and is deciding what to do with it. After the ceremony, the Academy held a faculty meeting that lasted 4 hours. The enrollment ledger was brought out. On the page that held Lien Kai's entry, the words, null vessel, unclassified, were crossed out with a single line. In the margin, in Director Saretha's narrow, careful handwriting, a new entry was added. It did not fit into any existing rank category. It simply said what it was. Lien Kai sat alone in the corridor outside the hall while the meeting went on inside. He had his bag on his knees. Students passed him in ones and twos, some glancing over, some looking away quickly, some stopping to stare before catching themselves and moving on. He did not mind. He was used to being looked at. The reason had simply changed. Mira Solen came around the corner and stopped when she saw him. She walked over and stood a few feet away. She looked at him in the same direct, measuring way she looked at everything. The orb has recorded 11,342 awakenings in this academy's history, she said. Her voice was even, like she was reporting a fact. Yours is the first one it could not survive. She paused. Welcome to first place. Then she walked away, her footsteps precise and quiet on the stone floor. Lien Kai watched her go. Then he looked down at the blank patch above his jacket pocket. He reached into his bag. He pulled out a small folded cloth, and inside the cloth, a needle and a spool of dark thread. He had sewn his own rank crest the night before, after lights out, working by the thin light that came under the dormitory door. He had made 2 versions. One for if the ceremony showed nothing. One for if it showed something. He unfolded the second one now. It was small and simple. A dark circle with a void at its center, not empty, exactly, but deliberately open. A shape that did not claim to contain something but made room for everything. He threaded the needle. He began to sew. The stone corridor was quiet. Outside the tall windows, the afternoon sun was moving across the academy's courtyard, lighting up the colored glass that had fallen from the upper hall and scattered across the flagstones below, blue and red and green and gold, lying in pieces on the ground, every fragment still catching light. He finished the last stitch and tied it off neatly. He smoothed the crest flat with his thumb. 3 years. 3 years of silence and blank stares and the particular loneliness of being surrounded by people who had already decided you were not worth their attention. 3 years of pressing his uniform the night before and walking the long corridors and standing at the back of every line. He had not known, exactly, what was living inside him. He had only known that the instruments they used to measure it were not built for it. He had been right. He put the needle and thread back in the cloth. He put the cloth in his bag. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and looked down the corridor toward the hall where the faculty were still deciding what to do with the fact of him. He was not in a hurry. He had waited 17 years. He could wait a little longer. He walked to the window and looked out at the courtyard below, at the glass scattered across the stones, each piece catching the afternoon light in its own small way. He stood there in the quiet corridor, wearing the crest he had made with his own hands, and he let himself feel, for just one moment, the full weight of what the morning had been. Then he took a breath. He straightened his shoulders. Tomorrow, the real work would begin.